You are listening to In Artversation, a discussion program as part of Warin Lab Contemporary Podcast, a podcast that explores art and sustainability. I am Sukontip Nakasem and I'm your host. Southeast Asia as a region has recently seen the rise of private museums in a variety of forms and capacities. Art patrons' vast collections are open to the public for viewing from a range of open house by appointment to non-profit organizations with active educational programs. Countries in Southeast Asia, with the exception to Singapore, share a common problem that public funding of art institutions and art infrastructure is lacking or non-existent. In the past 7 years, we saw the arrival of ILHAM Gallery in Malaysia in 2015, Museum MACAN in Indonesia in 2016, and Museum Museum in Thailand in 2017. It is quite interesting to see that all of them were established in a similar timeline. In this episode of In Artversation, I talk to brilliant minds who are behind discerning private museums in the Southeast Asia region. Aaron Seeto, a director of Museum MACAN from Indonesia, gave me an overview of the changes that private museums bring to the region's art ecosystem.
I think one of the interesting things about the three examples that you've given is that these are quite unique organizations in that they very much are emerging from and also responding to very local contexts. So I think that those organizations also understand that they have a broader civic and educational role, that it is not just about the presentation of collections or the presentations of exhibitions, but it is also about how that the building of this type of infrastructure can better support the art ecosystem and help to drive change within those particular locales. I also think that these kinds of organizations illustrate a maturity of the occurring within the ecosystems, and that they may also indicate a very particular way. Maybe there's something quite unique, a particular flavor for museums and activities that emerges from Southeast Asia. Here in Jakarta, Museum MACAN was established to address two or three core issues. One was to actually build infrastructure. In Indonesia, this kind of museum structure, which is aiming to be international standard, is not very present, and so that we understood that when we were building it, that this would have some impact on the broader ecosystem itself. But then the other major and one of the foundational ideas of the museum revolves around art education and art appreciation, so that the museum plays, even though we're a private museum, that we play a role within the civic context of Jakarta and the broader social context of Indonesia. So that is hopefully those things respond to the art ecosystem because that they have a positive impact. And I can see this also with my colleagues in ILHAM or in Museum, that they are very much responsive not only to art world needs, but also to the broader imagination that museums or art plays a very important role within social development.
I reached out to Valentine Willie, who is behind the establishment of ILHAM Gallery in Malaysia. Valentine has a strong determination to provide the public with free access to art. He advocates an intellectual approach on art education while steering the conversation away from financial aspects. I asked Valentine to share his view whether the recent founding of major private museums in Southeast Asia responds to any particular phenomenon in our region.
Firstly, I think it's the passion of the patrons themselves who started it, right? I think, people like Eric and Jean-Michel, they in Thailand, they were passionate collectors. And so is Pak Hadi and Arianto in Indonesia, and so is my patron. Yeah. They've been collecting for a long time. And when you collect for a long time, you're going to run out of space, and they want to start their own museum to show their collection, which is what happens basically in MACAN, in MACAN to some extent. With ILHAM, I try to do it differently. I think of all the shows we've done over the last 6 years, only 2 shows have been based on the collection of the patrons. It's not a museum in the sense we don't have a permanent collection like MACAN or MACAN. We do not, and nor do we publish what we have. It's an evolving collection. So most of our shows, I would say 90% of our shows are basically nothing to do with the collection the patrons have. It's really thematic, it's independent curators. We take shows from MACAN, we took shows from Parasite, shows that I think has resonance for the audience. With the MACAN show we took was the Petani show, with Southern Thailand, which we in Malaysia know almost nothing about, even though we are neighbors.
Yeah.
So that was important for me to bring it here. And then the other one was the show I took from Hong Kong, Parasite, which was all about migrant workers, which is again very important in the context of Malaysian society. So it's also, so in a way, ILHAM is slightly different from the other two, but both good models to start with. But in fairness, this is started in the Philippines long before it started in Malaysia or Thailand or Indonesia. The ILHAM Museum, private museum in Makati, that's been around for at least 30, 40 years, at least. And then, of course, the university museums are very active. Ateneo Museum has now extremely good programming, and again, free. It has an inbuilt audience because it's on site. It's in one of the top universities in Philippines. And UP now run by Patrick Flores, they've been doing great work. So this has been going on for some time. And of course, the MCAT in the Manila Contemporary Art and Design Center, which have their own also art center. So Philippines is really way ahead of all of us from before. So when it's a bit unfair to say there are only the 3. In the recent one, it has been these 3, but really the Philippines have been leading the way in terms of not only education, but also in terms of private museums.
The reason why art patrons start to build this museum is because they're trying to plug the gap where the art infrastructure is not in place?
Part of it is vanity. Part of it is kind of, their way of living a legacy. So, you can't deny that there is vanity involved when it's private museum. Vanity of collectors, vanity of people like me, about leaving a legacy. But at the end of the day, you still have to deliver, right? What program? You just show your collection and that's it. And how boring is that, right? Part of our thing, and I think most of all the 3 museums that we discuss is basically is engaging with contemporary art, engaging with living art. And, it's, one of the exciting things about Southeast Asian art is that it's very new. Everybody's still alive. They're not dead yet. They're still making things. They're still young. They're still exciting. And museums like ours, engage with that. That's exciting. I think the timing is it's quite fortuitous. I think, obviously, these 3 collectors have been collecting for some time. And, one of the reasons, of course, is running out of space. And secondly, it's probably a bit of vanity. And thirdly, there is an altruism in terms of they want to leave. They want education. They want people to be interested also in what they're interested in, right? To spread and share.
I read somewhere that you talk about that auction houses and certain collectors normally call the shot.
Yeah.
So with the arrival of private museum, what sort of influence that private museum have on art discourse?
Well, hopefully it has a good influence. Hopefully they will look at what we collect and why we collect them. Not just what we collect, but why we collect them. Why is it important that they enter a museum collection? I think that's very key. And oftentimes it's not a $1 million painting, right? So part of our role is really writing our own art history, right? And part of that, when in the process of writing that history is reevaluating what's important to us, what's important, what speaks to, what resonates with us in our history, in our society, in our culture. That will hopefully translate into monetary value. It's important, therefore it's valuable. Not only in terms of cultural value, but also perhaps monetary value, because these are special work that speaks to our times and our condition.
Here is Aaron's take on the influence of private museums in Southeast Asia's art discourse.
We're still seeing how this will impact the art discourse. But we also have to remember that the art discourse, even before private museums, is also very strong. That there was probably also over the same period, if not longer, that there has been a major interest in art from Southeast Asia. And this coincides with, I always like to take a kind of wider view on how these things emerge, that the way in which the art histories and the discourses around art in Southeast Asia have emerged are very local, very localized. And then in the 90s and later on, we saw how that these things were beginning to be shared in and amongst friends and colleagues in Southeast Asia. So the emergence of the art discourse and the emergence of private museums are really the product of global art histories. So that is those influences are the things that we're seeing. We're seeing how ideas and attitudes from elsewhere are impacting local scenes, and we're also seeing how the local scenes impacting what's going on elsewhere in other global art discourses. So remembering, of course, that globalization goes two ways. It's not just one way. It's not just the flows of information and capital going in, but it's also the information and culture and capital going out as well. So it's a much more complicated situation. And I think that what we are seeing is that with the emergence of private museums, that there's a different kind of confidence in the art world, in the art market, amongst collectors who are growing up with contemporary art, that their institutions will have an impact, as I said earlier on, in terms of education and also in terms of opportunity for audiences and also for artists. So the influences really revolve around the opportunities from globalization.
I looked at some of Museum MACAN's past acquisitions and learned that the museum acquired a controversial work titled Linga Yoni by Aramaiani. Can you talk about how the acquisition of artwork portrays the role of the private museum?
That work is so important for a number of reasons. And I think not only is it important in Aramaiani's own history and practice. So for your listeners who might not know, Aramaiani is one of Indonesia's leading contemporary artists who began to emerge not just in Indonesia, but also in the kind of Asian art world in the late 90s and 2000s through performance, through activism, and also through a very interesting personal history. She has a very long standing relationship with Thailand as well, because she made lots of important works there. But in 2017, when we were about to open the museum, we came across this very important work from 1996, which illustrates two things. It's a symbol of power. So we have going from top to bottom, we have a yoni and we have a linga. So it's about power. It's about the inversion of power. But also on this painting is both Arabic script and also a Jawi script. So it is a local language that uses Arabic script that has morphed in using those things. It's completely controversial. It was the reason why her exhibition was closed down at that point, and after which she self-exiled. When we found this work and we acquired this work, I think it really illustrates the role that museums play, the role that artists play, of course, but also the role that collections play. So Yani was completely overwhelmed that we were able to find this work because she thought that it had been lost. She didn't know where it was. It was in an excellent condition. It's such an important work in her own history. For the public, she was also proud and happy because she never thought that she would be able to present work like this again to the Indonesian public. So it says something about the role that museums play through collections. Of course, that period and that particular work is controversial because of its relationship to religion and to sex and to activism. And her work needs to be better understood here in Indonesia. And, we can do this by identifying work, acquiring it, and also presenting it.
The private museum is almost like a breath of fresh air for some artists who, has done something and the country not accepting it and just run away from it. So I thought that is a very good example of
but I think it also says something about the situations in which we live in Indonesia, where we don't always have open institutions. And in Indonesia, in other parts of Southeast Asia, the relationship between public and private is not the same as we might have a conversation in the West. It operates very, very differently. So we understand that as a private museum, we actually have a responsibility to the public because of our mission of education and art appreciation. And that, I think, is where we, and also probably the two other colleagues that you've identified, I think that we probably share something about having a sincere relationship to the public around access and sharing and education.
What do you think are the key success factors for the private museum to be able to sustain in the longer term? And I'm talking like 20, 30 years.
Oh, wow. Well, I think, the founder of the museum has always said this, and he's been always very clear that if you want to embark on a project like this, you actually have to have a vision. So there's no point in building a private museum if you don't actually have a vision. What does it do? Who is it for? Why is it being done? And I think that we're very clear about that, even throughout our children's program. So I think we run a really amazing program for children, connecting artists to really young audiences. And I say to the artists when we embark on these things is that we won't see the full impact of this in this generation. We will have to wait until these young kids are entering into the workforce, having children of their own. That is when we will see the impact of what we have been doing. So that I think that we already have a long-term perspective in terms of the sustainability. I mean, of course, how these things become sustainable is thinking about how you engage with your audiences over a long term, but also how you support staff and the kind of soft skills to input and to help develop the activities and to help develop the meaning of the institution as well. It's not just the bricks and mortar. It's actually in the long-term sustainability comes down to people. I think that we're very in tune with the social context when we make our programs, and we try and adapt. I mean, our attitudes are that we have to adapt so that we can meet people where they are rather than expecting them to understand exactly what's going on in a museum. And just as an aside, we have just recently opened our latest children's art space program with an artist called Teresia Sutompul. And so part of it is we bring kids and their schools into the museum to do workshops. And we did a workshop with this school last week. And we found out that on the weekend, one of these students brought their whole family in to show them and to take them through the things that they were making. And that's the flow-on effect that we want. I mean, here is a child who was happy, learned something, was really proud that she also wanted to share this with her parents and with her family. That's sustainability.
Yeah, and that's powerful, right? If the kids want to do something, the parents then very happy to
Absolutely, come along. Yeah. And because the flip side of that is not just the audience, but it's, as I said, the kind of soft skills of staff. It's a huge boost to know that they make a difference. And that triples throughout the whole institution to know that we're actually making a difference. That's impact.
I think is programming is key. I mean, like I said, you can't keep showing your own collection. Then it really becomes a dead museum. You must change what's on the wall from time to time. And the best way is to, we have at least a minimum of 3 shows a year at ILHAM that rotate. So it lasts for about 4 months, 3-4 months. And part of our, in every exhibitions, half our budget for the exhibition goes towards education, which means includes publication. Every exhibition comes with publication, with the catalog. Even when I have a gallery, every exhibition comes with a publication, whether it's a leaflet or a 2-pager or 1-pager or a massive catalog, I always publish. because exhibitions by definition are ephemeral. At the end of it, the end of the show is gone. It's finished, right? And the catalog is the only physical evidence of that happening. Of course, online thing now. So, and I treat publication as part of education. Education involves writing our own history, determining our own history.
You're talking about having publication as part of the writing the history, as archiving, sort of. And now the world has moved into digital, and a lot of people engage more in the digital world and also the metaverse. You feel that private museums should and how to embrace this digital technology and archiving into their program?
I think that the pandemic has forced us all to look at how we engage with our audience. Because, last 2 years, we've been closed most of the time. I think we were only from 3 or 4 months out of that 2 years, So I think, we've had to find a way to reach out to our audience. Otherwise, we lose purpose. We might as well close. So we were forced to reach out to our audience. So we lend our platform to artists, for instance. Yeah, we take our IG accounts taken over by artists once in a while. We have YouTube that is taken over by artists sometimes. So they have their voice because we built up viewership for them to access. People still want physical encounter with art. I don't think that's going to go away. Yeah, I think the pandemic has made it necessary for us to engage through the internet, not by choice, but because of circumstance. When we have the choice again, and we'll go back to galleries. We want to see the strokes on the painting. I want to see the shade of green or the shade of blue in real life, and not through the screen. And the other thing about whether or not museums can influence the buyer, I think one of the things that I've discovered when running a museum was that we don't need to own the art we show. Why do we need to own the art we show? We can borrow for the 3 or 4 months that we show. Whether it's thematic or whether it's a solo show, we borrow. Why do we need to own it? We don't need to own it. I don't need to buy it. The last retrospective we had in ILHAM was a Malaysian artist who died maybe 15 years ago. ILHAM doesn't own a single work. These are all from private collectors. So we have curators who decided that this artist is important to look at and overlook. Okay, let's go and do a show. Borrow the works.
Right. So you are the communication platform.
Yes, we need a kind of platform, a way like I said, writing our own history.
When the museum speak, you also have a loud voice as well.
You have credibility, yes. Not all museums are equal, yeah. Some are blatantly self-serving. It's less about the art and more about the patron.
You talk about young people, and now that we are into this digital world, that there's a metaverse, and a lot of young people actually prefer to live in this digital world on screen, and also the development of crypto voxel, where galleries can buy their land, and also people can browse the art there. So how does Museum MACAN looking at this change, and also how do you embrace the technology, and also how do you move in tandem of the world?
Okay, well, I'm so glad that you didn't ask about NFTs, but it seems to be the thing that everyone talks about. But this, of course, is a related issue. In 2017, when we were doing lots of planning, we were very aware of the role that technology will play in a 21st century museum. And actually, over the last 3 years, the speed of that conversation has been extraordinary. I mean, actually, we're having to think about these things probably earlier than what we really would like to be thinking about them. Metaverse and this discussion that you're having here is something, of course, that we all need to be aware of and begin to engage with, because, as you say, this is how young people think. These are the social spaces for the future. We will be having hybrid lives. We already have hybrid existences, so we need to be aware of them. But one thing that I would say is that actually a metaverse requires a well-functioning internet. And it goes back to one of the reasons why the museum was built, is that often places in Indonesia and probably also across Southeast Asia does not have the internet standards to completely support the full capacity of a metaverse. We're not there yet. We can imagine it, but I don't think that we are there yet. The other thing that I would say is, over the last 3 years, as we shift to, at certain times, almost 100% online engagement, we become much, much more aware of the economic, firstly, the technological barriers that emerge from economic situation. Not everyone has access to mediocre forms of internet. So we have to be aware. Well, firstly, number one, I would say, yes, We must be aware of what the technological advancements are, the social spaces are shifting to. But at the same time, we have to also be wary that we're not just recreating spaces that reinscribe social inequity. This is something that we're very aware of, even through our education programs, of how do we access the kids who actually need to have the access to the art education. So we need to be aware of these things, that yes, there will be great possibilities and opportunities in the metaverse, but how do we moderate the real world access to these places?
Museum MACAN is at the forefront of Southeast Asia contemporary art scene. Can you share what is the museum's mission and what are the challenges facing the team to accomplish such mission?
I'll deal with the easy one first, which is the mission.
Okay.
I think there are three, almost four components of our mission. One, it is about having a physical space where we are working towards international standards so that we can present not only exhibitions of Indonesian art, but also to be able to secure loans and exhibitions from other places here. So that means climate controls, professional staff, professional education staff, all of those things. Then the second one, which is also related, it revolves around art education. That is our kind of civic responsibility to provide access to children and their families so that they are able to benefit from an experience in a museum, an experience actually standing in front of an artwork. I think the context of Indonesia is really important here because we are very young. We're not an aging population. We're a very young country. And so those opportunities around education will be completely transformative in the next generations. And then the third part of our mission is around cultural exchange. How do we generate networks and conversations, not just in Indonesia, but also with our peers amongst Southeast Asia and further afield. Having said all of that, we're very aware of our location in Southeast Asia. So we want to build those networks regionally as well. So we understand that we have a global outlook, but we're very much located within Indonesia, very much surrounded by countries with shared interests and shared histories within the region as we're looking further afield. The challenges are many. I think that you started off saying that over the past 7 years, but let's also be realistic. We've lost 2.5, nearly 3 years of those seven years of activity in Southeast Asia. So I think the challenges of the pandemic are real. And everyone faces them. I mean, let's not repeat them here because I think that we know what they all are. But before the pandemic, the challenges are really around the infrastructure. We had to build the infrastructure because it was not necessarily existing in the city. We were constant. I mean, one of the things about not having strong museological practices in Indonesia is that we can also reimagine these processes anew. And so this is less of a challenge, but really the opportunity is to be able to look at, reimagine how to run a museum, how to do these things which are meaningful for our immediate communities. And how that these things may be more reflective of the region that we live in. Moving out of the pandemic, I think we're yet to see the full impact and there will be future challenges, I think, around sustainability, of course. I think that we've become much more aware of the social inequities and access as a result of the pandemic. And I think that we need to address these things in our programs and also in our activities.
What do you hope to see happening across Southeast Asia art ecosystem?
I'd like to see is better professionalism in the gallery system. Documentation is important. Publication catalogs is important. Using the social media to much more effectively have curators the writers write about the art, so we can argue about it or like it or not like it. It's an entry point. It's a start. If you don't like an essay, that's a start.
To get the conversation going.
Yeah, this is a start. I don't like it. I think it's wrong. That's conversation.
At the intellectual level as well.
Just the curiosity level. It doesn't have to be intellectual. Not everybody wants to know, the kind of, metaphysical meaning or spiritual meaning of a painting. Someone, I like the color. Right. There's nothing wrong with that. You got to be able to engage on different levels. I mean, I graduated from collecting watercolors to installation photography. So we all grow and we will continue to grow. Our taste will change. And just to keep that process ongoing and not be blind and say, I will not look at this, I will not look at that. So then you stop learning.
How about you, Aaron? What do you hope to see happening?
Well, firstly, I hope that we'll be able to see each other again in person very soon. I think that we missed that because I think that actually that is one of the reasons why art in Southeast Asia has been so interesting over the last decade and a half is because there's been an openness to collaborate and openness to communicate. So we must have that. Otherwise, I think that there will be challenges to the ecosystem. I would also say that there should be more conversations and more opportunities across all of the levels, not just in terms of the private museums, but also how do we support the nonprofit spaces and how do we support the market in other areas so that we are building resilient systems, not just having the interest around the things that seem to be around the private spaces. That's what we need. And also we need to be supporting, especially in places where we don't have great philanthropy or great government support, we need to be supporting the next generation of artists, critics, curators, and thinkers who will help us to navigate as we move out of this weird situation we've been in.
Please stay tuned for our future episodes of In Artversation. Thank you for listening.